Traffic through the Strait of Hormuz is down to a trickle. But what's in that trickle? A few tankers are passing through each day, most on their way to China, but all are paying in Chinese RMB. Why is that? Since the US and Israel jointly launched attacks into Iran on February 28th, China has been conspicuously quiet. So what does China want in all of this? And what doesn't it want? Who are the key players in this China-Iran relationship? It's probably not who you think. And why this is more a marriage of convenience than formal alliance. Time to charge up. China is Iran's only friend in the world. The harsh to very harsh sanctions organized by the United States are a big reason for that. Those sanctions have also made relations between China and Iran very unequal. Iran is basically cut off from the global banking system that runs on US dollars. To survive, Iran needs China for industrial equipment, for tech products, for surveillance software, for some defense stuff like drones. We'll get back there in a minute. And to buy its oil. On the other hand, several things make Iran useful, I won't say vital, to China. First, the thing we all know about, oil. China buys Iranian oil. China's like the only country that buys Iranian oil. In 2024, over 90% of Iran's oil exports went to China, and China is buying this oil at big discounts, sometimes $8 to $10 off of every barrel, because who else is going to buy it? In Iran, Chinese exporters get access to another market. Okay, this market doesn't compare to the other big ones that China deals with, but the Iranian market has been pretty free of foreign competition, especially since 2018 when Trump 1.0 reinstituted so-called maximum pressure sanctions. Pressure the likes of which we've never seen. Those sanctions scared away American, European, and many Asian businesses who do business in other parts of the world for fear of getting cut off from that US dollar-dominated system. Actually, some big Chinese companies don't do business in Iran either for fear of those same consequences. So in Iran, a sizable country of like 93 million people with plenty of natural resources, China gets a friend in this strategically sensitive Middle East that is beefy enough to stand up against US power, like we're seeing now. But this isn't to say that China wants to stir things up in the region. It's more about building relationships, what the Chinese call partnerships or 伙伴. China has many friends in the Middle East and no real desire or capacity to build an alternative order in the region. With Iran in particular, China gets some geopolitical leverage without China having to overcommit or really do much at all. In other words, China keeps Iran at arm's length by design. So we've got many aspects here to the relationship. Energy, trade, diplomacy. Let's do the energy one. Iran sells oil to almost no one because it's not allowed to. Or rather, no buyer wants to risk buying Iranian oil for fear of the consequences. China, on the other hand, buys oil from anyone who wants to sell it. China imports about 11 to 12 million barrels per day. That's the biggest volume of any country by far. And it's one reason why Chinese planners and strategists have worked hard to avoid becoming overly dependent on a single supplier of oil. Just over half of those 11 or so million barrels per day that arrive in China come from the Middle East. Here's the problem. Almost every tanker of crude from the Middle East that goes to China must pass through, you got it, the Strait of Hormuz. Let's get back to Iranian crude for a second. Shipments of Iranian crude to China are almost 4 times what they were as recent as 2020, with China importing almost 1.4 million barrels per day from Iran in 2025. Now, we add on that $8 to $10 discount on every barrel of crude from Iran, and then throw on discounts on Russian crude. That's real savings for China. Maybe $10 billion in savings every year. Iran is not thrilled about the discounts, but what can they do about it? But China is also deeply tied into the US dollar-dominated global economy, so to buy Iranian crude, it's had to get pretty creative. A wily and sophisticated network of smallish Chinese operators are the ones handling the business of buying, transporting, and refining crude from Iran. They use a bunch of crafty tricks to disguise the cargo and the cargo's origins. Some call it the dark fleet. This network includes creating shell companies in fronts, using older vessels that falsify GPS signals, disabling automatic identification AIS transponders. The vessels often swap names and they swap flags. Sometimes they do ship-to-ship transfers at sea before heading to China, usually the port of Dongying in Shandong province. There is a whole network of refineries, the so-called teapots, that wait to refine this crude from Iran. These smallish, kind of private teapot refineries process about 90% of the crude that comes to China from Iran. Why? Because China's big national oil companies, which have operations throughout the world and do so much business in US dollars, want nothing to do with the risk that may come from processing Iranian crude. The US government knows this. There's nearly 400 Chinese or Hong Kong-based ones that are hit with sanctions, with more regularly added to these lists. But what about the financial side of these deals? Payment is done in yuan or Chinese RMB, is routed through front companies and small regional banks in China, not the big state-owned ones, or perhaps through Hong Kong middlemen, and they use fake invoices, all part of this cat and mouse game to directly skirt the SWIFT banking system and major Western banks. For Iran, having growing stocks of Chinese RMB isn't ideal. It's not a currency that's easily convertible. You can't really use it in many places. So what often occurs then is Iran having to use those RMB to purchase stuff from China. Infrastructure, tech products, or something down the road, giving all of this a company store dynamic. This intricate but shady network that's been in place for many years now should also make us suspicious of any claims that only a tanker or two are getting through the Strait of Hormuz every day. There's probably quite a bit more. China and Iran have been playing this game for quite some time. Let's get into some of the trade and military stuff in this relationship. China is Iran's largest trading partner. Okay, that's not saying much. China is the largest trading partner of like 125 countries. But put it differently, Iran's share of China's overall trade is 0.02%. That's it. US sanctions are the big barrier preventing more Chinese companies, especially those with big business abroad dealing a lot in US dollars, from doing more business in Iran. That whole saga starting in late 2018 between Canada and China, the hostage diplomacy with China holding the two Michaels and Canada holding Princess Meng Wanzhou, the daughter of the Huawei founder, the soybean and pork ban, Trudeau not getting his calls returns, all of that drama was centrally about Huawei allegedly violating US sanctions on Iran. What about the nuclear stuff? China has been consistently hesitant on supporting Iran's nuclear program. The nuclear agreement known as JCPOA that was signed in 2015, China was a big part of that, eased sanctions on Iran. Temporarily anyway. Xi Jinping even visited Tehran in 2016 and announced his vision for $600 billion in bilateral trade within a decade. Yeah, we're not even like 1/10 of that number, but here's to manifesting.
I'm focusing all my energy on manifesting the life I want.
Once Trump 1.0 withdrew from that nuclear agreement in spring 2018, China became Iran's economic lifeline, the only big country willing to buy Iran's sanctioned oil in real volumes. Now, for Iran's military and defense modernization, China has bobbed in and out, including support for Iran's own production centers for cruise missiles, artillery, armored vehicles, naval craft, and rockets, all of which are basically on display during this war. Iran likely wouldn't have this self-sufficient defense industry without years of China's support, even if China's role here was always a distant number two to Russia here. Adding to this, Chinese weapon sales to Iran were often a sign of displeasure following US arms sales to Taiwan. If you can support our enemies, we can support yours. In the Middle East, China has engaged in a careful balancing act. Sure, it's acted as Iran's only economic lifeline in recent years, but it's also built these bigger partnerships, Huoban, with various countries in the region. This is in part because the Middle East has featured more prominently in China's strategic calculations and China's growing international footprint, with deals totaling about $39 billion. That's 2 times more than the previous year. Oil is a big part of this. China buys oil, of course, from Iran, but also from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Oman, UAE, you name it. But there's fast-growing trade between China and the region beyond oil as well. for tech and consumer products, as well as almost $12 billion in green energy projects alone. An area that China has a distinct industrial advantage. Check out my episode on that right there. In particular, Saudi Arabia is China's largest BRI partner in the Middle East. Xi Jinping even visited Riyadh in 2016 and in 2022. Saudi Arabia, for its part, has wanted to show that it's also attractive beyond its close relationship with the United States. Because of China's goodwill with both the Saudis and Iranian regimes, China was able to mediate and broker an agreement between the two arch enemies back in 2023. That doesn't seem like much now, but it was a thing at the time. It also showed how China preferred de-escalation over alignment and violent conflict. China also tried to broker an agreement between the Palestinian factions in summer 2024, something that pissed off the Israelis, really the only country that has experienced a cooling of relations with China in the region. China also made a quiet side deal with the Houthis in Yemen, a group I've talked about before, so that Chinese cargoes wouldn't be affected by attacks in or near the Red Sea. So what to take from all of this? China isn't trying to present or build an alternative order in the region. It doesn't want to, and it can't do that. Instead, it's biding its time, staying quiet, but gradually increasing activity and building these partnerships with various countries in the region. So is China the only winner of this war in the Middle East? It gets cheaper oil from Iran, albeit at smaller quantities, but China has been prepping for an oil shock like this for many decades now. More of these deals and sales are being done in RMB, although the volumes are still very small. Meanwhile, the US continues to berate and alienate its allies. It's now locked into this murder-suicide pact with Israel, teetering on the brink of a major quagmire in Iran, something that will drain its resources and destabilize the region. For Gulf allies that have dumped billions, maybe trillions of dollars into US defense equipment, some of which was very quickly burning on the ground days within the start of this war. What part of this does not benefit China? That's it for now. Thank you so much for watching and for your support. Like, subscribe, share with a friend. Till next time.
You're losing your mind and you're losing this war. Face it. You tweet like a madman, threatening power, plans and bridges. Praise be to Allah. You sound unhinged.